Yes, welcome to everyone. Great to see such great numbers attending this morning's event. My name is Lisa Beverly-Jones and I'm the project manager for the Marine Eye project here in Cornwall. I'm just going to run you through the agenda so that you know what to expect from this morning and then pass over to our first speaker. Event starting now at 11:30. We expect to run for 2 hours. In a minute, I'm going to pass over to Professor Lars Johanning, who will give you an introduction to the Marine Eye 2 project. Professor Lars is the programme lead for this project here at University of Exeter. We've then got a series of guest speakers this morning. So at 12 o'clock we have Steve Jeremy talking about floating offshore wind. Steve's from Cornwall and Isles of Scilly Lep, and he's going to take us through the Celtic Sea Alliance, the Celtic cluster, talking a little bit about UK macroeconomic reporting, supply chain reports and spatial mapping, and there'll be a 5 to 10 minute slot for questions at the end of his session. Our second session is Airbus, and we're going to have guest speakers of Hugh Kelly and David Jones from Blue Gem Wind, which is Simply Blue and Total Consortium. They're going to take us through Blue Gem Wind, Airbus and supply chain requirements. And again, there'll be a 5 to 10 minute slot for some questions at the end. We've then got a wash up and any further questions to follow. So anything that we haven't had time to cover off in questions from any of the first 2 sessions, we'll pick up in the wash up. And we've got 30 minutes allocated to that. Simon Cheeseman from the OREC Catapult and Matt Hodson from CDC, along with Professor Lars Johanning, will handle those. And we aim to close the session at 1:30. Okay, without further ado, I'll pass over to Lars Johanning to introduce the Marine Eye 2 project.
Welcome everyone. Sorry. Sorry, it's a wrong screen. Welcome everyone. I hope you can see my screen. I welcome you all to this virtual session on floating offshore wind. My name is Lars Johanning. I'm the project lead on this program, and I will give you an overview what the Marine Eye is all about. So Marine Eye is really entering into a new phase. Marine Eye 1, phase 1 has finished in December 2019. So we're now starting with this new program, phase 2. The program overall has not changed his visions and main objectives. So Marine Eye provides still the leadership and focal point to galvanize and support business-led and market-driven research, development and innovations. We have certainly in this new program done some changes and modifications, but what is our real objective is to accelerate, the development of innovative new products there. And certainly we're looking forward working with all these businesses, you by being part of this certainly. The partnership is Exeter University is a lead. We have University of Plymouth, the Offshore Renewable Energy Catapult, the Cornwall College Group, the Cornwall Marine Network, and Cornwall Development Company. The overall funding of the project is just over £5.5 million. 1 million is part of this will be funding to companies, and we will have to generate there nearly £600,000 of match funding. So as said, our aim is create a sustainable and innovative marine technology sector in Cornwall where business can thrive and succeed in global markets well into the future. So we want to leave a legacy at the end of the project, as we have already done in Marine Eye phase 1. We have also a strategy group, and the strategy group has met in the beginning of the project, and this has set a kind of direction for us. And the direction is really in terms of our mission statements there. So Marine Eye should be mindful of the challenges posed by climate change, the need to transition to a low carbon economy, and the need to manage changing coastal processes. If you look at priorities, certainly there are the RD&I developments, but we're looking in marine technology processes, products and services. And this should lead certainly to significant impact in low carbon energy markets and other growth areas within the ocean economy. So new technologies addressing the clean marine energy agenda and coastal adaptations are the areas we are focusing on. And our alignment, so in this meeting, we're not having only businesses from Cornwall here. We also have we certainly have a regional, but we also have a national global strategy, and we're reaching out to the broader industry and stakeholders. So what we're offering really, so comprehensive RD&I support through engagement with world-class research expertise there we're offering. We have access to, or you have access to an exceptional range of test facilities, and I will talk to this in a minute a bit more. Graduate placements we have on offer, so this can be 3, 6, or 9 months long. And the graduates can be based at the businesses in this case. We have outreach programs, and this event is part of this outreach program. And of course, increased profile for businesses. So we have a website, and we're using this to show the outputs and of course the profile of the business who are engaging with us there. And of course, we have a grant support, as I mentioned, £1 million available there. What we can offer in terms of demonstrations, RD&I. Our targets, what we have to meet. So we intending to engage with 96 businesses or enterprises. We can give 26 grants out. I said, and overall is about £1 million available there. 70 of these businesses will receive non-financial support. 8 new enterprises we intending to generate there in this particular marine sector there. I said we have to generate some match funding there. 9 businesses will receive support in terms of hopefully increasing the employment there. 30 enterprises will be cooperating with research institution, and 8 new products should be generated through this Marine Eye phase 2 project. In terms of really what we have on offer there, the key areas there, what we're focusing, as I said, some of them, not all, but marine and offshore engineering there, marine technologies, aquaculture technology is an important part, is a technology here really. As you can see there, of course, the optimization of floating platforms, and of course, this is what we're talking about there, but also in terms of O&M strategies, etc. The group, the consortium of the 6 partners have all these key areas and skills really to support this particular area of work. We have software capabilities there as well where we can use that we can use to support businesses. In terms of the facilities, and on the website you can find more. I just mentioned a couple here really. So you have access, for example, to the Coast Lab facilities there, one of the world leading facilities in order of demonstrate and test early stage technologies there. You also have access to facilities in terms of energy or marine energy de-risking and looking in terms of the data. You will have facilities to the dynamic marine component facility. This one enables you, for example, to demonstrate some of the components, such like power cables. You have access to a demonstration site, Falmouth Bay test sites there, where you can again demonstrate early concepts there. And we've seen one, what was tested the last time around. You also have facilities in terms of material testing there or of blade testing. So a wide range of facilities that you can access in order to demonstrate your innovations. So accelerating business growth is our key objective, really. Said you have access to the RD&I expertise here, and we're intending to develop new products, I said before, but we're really looking and developing with you as many as possible there for exciting new products. And of course, we are open for the global market opportunities. So really, we're focusing on developing RD&I, what hits the global markets there. And we're really aiming to continue on our success within Marine I. So we have had various examples there, and again on the Marine I website, you can see lots of case studies. Here we just took two really out. Arc Marine was one of the projects who received funding there, and their comment was the whole experience of working with Marine I has been extremely positive. It is proving to be a valuable catalyst in helping us along our journey towards commercialization. So exactly what we want to do, and it's a very nice comment back there. And Marine Power Systems commented the success that we have achieved with these trials at the Coast Lab and FAB test has enabled us to take a significant step forwards towards commercialization of our technology. So again, good example through Marine I, what we want to achieve. And I hope we can work with you together in the future, again, to expand on this achievements. This is all what I would like to say. So thank you very much again for joining, and I'm really looking forward to receive questions later on and in the upcoming speeches. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Lars. I think we'll move on to our first guest speaker then. First up, we've got Steve Jeremy from Cornwall Isles of Scilly LEP. And Steve, can I hand over to you?
Yeah, Lisa, that's for sure. Just a second, I'll get my slides up and running. Okay, Lisa, you see the slides?
Yes, we can see the
Fantastic.
slides.
Okay. Okay, well, good to hear Lars kicking off. Lars and I have been working together, as in many people in the sector, for some years now. My name, as Lisa said, is Steve Jeremy. I work for WaveHub, where I'm the chair and the acting chief exec at the moment, but I'm here in two other roles as well. I sit on the Local Enterprise Partnership, Cornwall Isles of Scilly's Local Enterprise Partnership, where I have the lead for marine and energy matters. I'm a non-executive there. And I sit as well on the Offshore Wind Industry Council Clusters Group, where I represent the Celtic Sea Cluster. I should just explain for those of you who don't know, and I'm conscious that we've got a very broad audience from including across the world. The Local Enterprise Partnership essentially is a regional development agency. So it's an agency which essentially is business-led, but public sector supported. And has responsibility for economic development in Cornwall. We work hand in glove with Cornwall Council, and one of the key focuses of the Local Enterprise Partnership in Cornwall is floating offshore wind, I'm pleased to say. My background is, I come from the offshore renewable sector. I've been working in it for over 10 years, and since early 2018, I've been leading on an initiative to develop the floating offshore wind industry in the Celtic Sea. So without further ado, I'm going to run through and bring you really up to date with this. I'm conscious that some members of the group will have heard some of this presentation before, but I make no apologies for that, because some of you will be coming new to this. You'll want to understand where we've got to in this country. So in terms of brief, here's the structure. I'll talk initially about the geopolitical context in which we sit and which the floating offshore wind industry is developing. So then move on to floating offshore wind, a bit about the offshore wind story generally, and then more specifically about floating offshore wind, and then focus specifically on what we're doing in Cornwall and indeed the broader Celtic Sea, just so that you can see where we're going. So without further ado, let's talk a little bit about the geopolitical context. Climate emergency declarations breaking out all over the place, and there have been two here. So the Local Enterprise Partnership and the County Council here in Cornwall announced climate emergencies at the beginning of last year, and we've been working since to sort of support the work for that. That's not an entire surprise. What will be interesting to see is the impact that we see as a result of the coronavirus, but I'll talk about that in a bit. Worth as well thinking about energy security, and that's where the coronavirus perhaps comes in. If you look at these areas, these are the areas where the main oil reserves come from, and you can see that not all the areas are most stable. And I think we've also seen that as a consequence of the coronavirus, there have been impacts on oil supplies. I think it's going to be fascinating to watch and see what happens to the overall oil supplies over the next sort of 10 or 20 years. Not least of all, and I'm slightly different thinker in this respect, people don't realize how critical oil is to the renewable energy transition. We can't do this transition without diesel. Renewables though, and this is the slide from BP's Energy Outlook. They produce these once every year. And I think that is an important area to highlight. Renewables set to penetrate the global energy system more quickly than any fuel in history. That has to be a good market opportunity for anybody wanting to be in this business. So let's talk a little bit then about floating offshore wind and the story so far. Here's the British onshore wind, sorry, offshore wind generally. That's the conventional wind areas. On the left-hand slide, you can see in red where most of the offshore wind portfolio is. There's some up in Scotland as well, not showing on this slide. But then in pink, you can see where were the intended areas for the Crown Estate to go and start to build out. And what you'll see in both of those slides is the existing portfolio is essentially a portfolio, largely speaking, in the North Sea. And the reason being that it's shallow, and the same to a certain extent in the Irish Sea. And that the build-outs were, with one or two exceptions, still in the east of the UK. And indeed the exceptions, the little place south of the Isle of Wight, for those of you who know it, the Navitas Bay array, and one which is in the Atlantic array, both of which were cancelled for a variety of reasons, but one of which was technical challenges due to depths of water. It's been a strategic success for UK. I think we're 8.2 gigawatts of offshore wind. We used to be more offshore wind than the rest of the world put together, and that's no longer the case, but we're still significantly the market leader in terms of overall deployed. Perhaps less of a success though in terms of the business that's resulted from that. Here are the industries, or here are the companies that I routinely deal with, and for those of you who know them, you'll see that the vast majority are actually European countries, and there are very few British companies in there. I think that's a shame, but I think it's something that we can very possibly correct when we come to floating offshore wind. So floating offshore wind, some of you will know it extremely well, been working in it like me for some time, others will not though. So what I'm going to do is just talk a little bit about the technologies to give you an overall overarching sort of view of them, and then focus in on why we think floating offshore wind is important. Four typologies really, and going from left to right. To the left, as you see it, is the Sparboy. This is the technology that's deployed up in the Highwind project up in Scotland. Equinor's lead that project. It's 30 megawatts, 5 devices, and has been installed since 2018. I love the wave and tidal sector, but it's just worth, in terms of understanding the difference between these two sectors, reflecting that Equinor installed more capacity in that single project than the whole of the wave and tidal industry has in the whole of its life. So it gives you a sense of the speed with which this particular floating offshore wind sector is moving. We won't know, I think, see those technologies deployed in the southwest, and the reason is they require a lot of depth of water in ports, 70 meters for that particular topology, because of the depth of the foundations. More likely the middle two, and I'm conscious that we've got representatives from both PPI, which is the semi-submersible, and Ideol, which is the barge, on the call. And I'll simply say that both of these technologies are market ready and starting to deploy at array scale. Last but not least, to the right-hand side of the technology, essential leg platforms. I suspect it'll be some time before we see these. So for those of you who are really interested in the southwest, it's the middle two of those two technologies, which are the ones where I'm sure that we'll be seeing as we start to build out in the southwest. Moving on, what's the difference between floating offshore wind and fixed offshore wind? 4 or 5 different issues, really. Firstly, unlike fixed offshore wind, where all of the foundations that we design are, generally speaking, bespoke for their particular geotechnical conditions of that particular turbine, sorry, that particular part of the seafloor, we can mass produce the floaters, the floating foundations. They can be constructed in shelter waters, which means that we don't have to employ expensive jack-up barges offshore, or indeed face the weather risks of working offshore. Take the largest turbines, and last of all, they can access the best wind resources. The best wind resources in British waters are to the west of Scotland and in the southwest approaches, generally speaking. Generally, they're deeper waters there, and so only accessible for floating foundations. Last but not least, I think we can build these out at scale rapidly, and if you're trying to hit 2030 and 2050 targets, that matters. For those of you who understand the capacity factor bit of it, the 58% capacity factor, which is what the Equinor project up in Scotland is showing, is an extraordinary figure, much higher than we're used to, and very important in terms of how we believe that we can get the levelized cost of energy of these devices down. Equinor are predicting the levelized cost of energy for floating between 40 and 50 euros a megawatt hour, and I do not think those figures are incredible, albeit we've got a long way to go to get to them. Where is the market and what does the market look like? I mentioned that renewables are set to penetrate the global energy system, according to BP, quicker than any fuel in history. And I think within renewables, if you ask me to bet, I'd bet on offshore wind. CAGR for fixed offshore wind, which essentially is a industry which is up and running well, is 15.3%. And for floating offshore wind, I've seen predictions of over 50%. Not least of all, because of course there's much more deep water out there than shallow, and so much more deep water that's accessible if we can get into floating. The 2 pictures at the bottom, for which I'd thank the Carbon Trust, just give you a sense of where the floating offshore wind market is. I'd say the leading area at the moment is Europe, but Asia as well. And where you see blue on those diagrams, they're 2018 diagrams, so a little bit of updating to do. But where you see blue, there is actual floating offshore wind devices deployed, and where you see green, there are intentions to deploy. So this is an industry which is moving. There are American plans as well. So this is an industry which is moving and for which there is a market, and a market that's growing quickly. So what have we been doing about this locally? Let's talk a little bit about the Cornwall Floating Offshore Wind Initiative, which really began in the spring of 2018. Where will we put floating offshore wind first? As we started to think about this, we started to realize that actually there were only 2 places in the UK that you would do this. The first is up in Scotland, and the second is in the southwest approaches, or the Celtic Sea. The Celtic Sea is the area there on the diagram between Pembroke, Cornwall, and South Ireland. And the zones are zones which I'll talk about in just a second, but which are the areas where we think we're likely to be deploying floating offshore wind turbines. Minimum depth, again, according to Carbon Trust work, is around about 60 meters, but we believe at the moment, and it's still very early days, that the sweet spot's going to be between 100 and 250 meters. So that's really from 100 meters out to the end of the continental shelf. And for those reasons, everywhere else in the UK is generally much shallower than this. So for those reasons, it is just these two areas where we'll probably deploy. We probably want to be within about 360 miles maximum of ports. And that means that for the Celtic Sea, the probable ports that we deploy from are Milford Haven and Falmouth, although there are other ports which as well could take a supporting role. There are still issues with grid access, but the grid problems are solvable, we believe, having talked to former National Grid employees. And so there are still questions about where we bring the power ashore. But to give you a sense of it, there's a lot of power out there. In those 4 zones or 5 zones that you can see on the screen, there's in excess of 100 gigawatts of power, which compares to an overall UK requirement of about 43 gigawatts at max power requirement. To actually develop this sector, though, we need 2 things. We need a project pipeline and we need innovation seed funding. So that's sort of revenue support to allow us to drive down the levelized cost of energy and to get to a situation where we're subsidy free. And I'll talk about both of those in a bit more detail just now. What have we been doing though at the higher level? Don't worry too much about the central document, but that was a ministerial submission which we in the local enterprise partnership sent to the then Energy Minister Claire Perry. We began an engagement with her in July of 2018, opening up to her the opportunity that existed in the Celtic Sea. As a result of that face-to-face conversation with her, we submitted the ministerial submission in October, and that was endorsed by BEIS, by her office in November 2018. After that, we're beginning to engage a lot with BEIS and with the Crown Estate, and then again with the Energy Minister in July 19, where we gave her an update of where we got to. We were running a number of seminars and engaging locally, so starting to build political support, which I'm pleased to say is absolutely uniform now. And at the same time, starting to reach out to other areas. One of those, CSA, stands for the Celtic Sea Alliance, and we've begun fairly quickly reaching out to South Wales as well. So Marine Energy Wales, and then as a result of our engagement, Cornish engagement with Marine Energy Wales, we then reached out as well to Ireland, or we began talking to each other and formed what was known as the Celtic Sea Alliance. That's a political grouping between 3 nations, the Cornish, the Welsh and the Irish, with the specific aim of providing, if you like, a political support to the idea of building out the regional Celtic Sea opportunity. We also had conversations with Treasury officials in August and September, and then were invited to feed into some of the political debates on both sides of the spectrum. But I'm delighted to say that in December 20, the Conservative Party manifesto included a commitment to increase offshore wind from 30 gigawatts to 40 gigawatts and to enable floating offshore wind. So that's a real ask. Working in the sector, I think to actually get to 40 gigawatts on just conventional offshore wind could be done, but it's a big ask. So it seems to me that it makes huge sense for floating offshore wind to be part of that increase of 10 gigawatts. We've had discussions subsequently this year, input into the Marine Management Organisation's Southwest Area Plan, and we're about to input into BEIS's CFD consultation. I should just say that essentially the way that I read that CFD consultation, contract for different, is that there are within it 4 pages specifically focused on floating offshore wind, and uniquely so. So it's really clear that, to me, that BEIS appearing to be turning into policy the manifesto commitment of the Conservatives in December of last year. There's been a lot of work going on in support, and I'm thanks particularly to the Catapult for this, the Offshore Renewable Energy Catapult, who produced in 2018 the left hand of those documents, macroeconomic document, talking about the opportunities of floating offshore wind. More recently, they completed a piece of work for the Welsh Government and the Cornish Local Enterprise Partnership, which talked about the supply chain benefits. Both of those pieces of work are actually up on the Catapult's website. so accessible to everybody. And last but not least, they've just completed a constraints mapping piece of work, or had that work commissioned and completed for them, which is where we've got those zones from and started to understand better the capacity of the Celtic Sea. So a lot of work which has been completed shows the capacity of the Celtic Sea, and also is available for us to be able to feed into that consultation and allow us to secure the revenue support that we need. Learning from revenue support and the evidence to support that to the project pipeline, we have building a project pipeline with 3 or 4 components in it. To start off with Wave Hub, which is where I'm in my day job. We're in the process of repurposing that site for floating offshore wind. It has the capacity for 30 megawatts, possibly we could possibly increase that. It will be ready, we believe, for AR4, and we're in the process of divesting that to a project developer and expect to have sold the site to a project developer by the end of this year for the purposes of building out a floating offshore wind project at 30 megawatts. You'll hear later from, very shortly, from Blue Gen, so I won't say too much about that and steal their thunder. Jumping ahead onto Pembrokeshire Demonstration Zone, that's a Welsh project, but being run by Wave Hub as the project developer. Originally designed as a wave energy project, we're in the purpose of repurposing that to floating offshore wind for somewhere between 90 megawatts and 150 megawatts. We believe that will be ready for AR6 for 2025, and that will be supported by, it's being funded by Welsh Government money from both Swansea Bay City Deal and Welsh ERDF funding. And last but not least, we have in mind 2 further projects deeper out into the Celtic Sea. Trelawney 1 and Trelawney 2 will amuse the Cornish amongst you, but essentially something like 800 megawatts and supported by ERDF funding and what's called Strength in Places funding. Both of those are conceptual, if you like, but together you will see that there's a totality there which could allow us, under a business as usual scenario, to actually get to 1 gigawatt by 2030. Next slide. Okay, this is what the Wave Hub project will give you, and I've simply given this as an illustration of the amount of work involved. We're talking about something like 4 turbines. Very much depends on the project developer and the purchaser. Probably a life cycle on the lease of 25 years. The capex could be in the order of 150 million. And for those of you in the local supply chain, there's an illustration there of what sorts of monies, what sorts of inward investment that would be needed to actually deliver this. So you can see that there is an amount of money of the 150 million which will be available to the local supply chain, and an exciting start, I think. We see this very much as a stepping stone project to the bigger projects, allowing the supply chain and the industry to really get going and then develop its skills across the Celtic Sea. In slightly broader term, we're now starting to think about the Celtic Sea and the Celtic Sea cluster. The Celtic Sea cluster, I should say, is an industrial grouping as required by the offshore wind sector deal. And that is an industrial grouping and comprised of 3 regions, really. It's the Cornish, the Welsh, South Wales, I would say, and last but not least, the Great Southwest, with the idea here of starting to build the industrial capacity to build out the sector and maximise local economic development and jobs. We're developing a regional business plan which will have 6 lines of action, an overall governance line of action, a line of action where we keep going with market creation, so that's making sure that that project pipeline is continuing to build and the revenue support is secured for the projects in there, and thinking about how we plan those bigger zones, thinking about the industry, making sure that we have grid capacity, ports and infrastructure, and the engineering, procurement, construction and installation capacity to maximise local jobs, making sure that the RD&I support is aligned, so that's the universities, the research technical organisations and the test and evaluation organisations are all aligned, making sure that we've got the skills and that the SMEs who want to play into this market have the support to allow them to adapt. And last but not least, making sure that we've got the public sector and the private and international sector investment to underpin all of the above. Our intention is for a regional business plan to be complete by the end of this year to give that structure and to allow us to build out. So let me just summarize then. This is an exciting time for floating offshore wind. It's investable, which makes it different, I think, to wave and tidal. Tidal is starting to be investable, not really the same way, but we can see investors wanting to come in, and as importantly, there's obvious signs of the oil and gas industry coming in as well. It's a perfect regional match for what we can do. So, for example, in Cornwall, we have great offshore skills. In South Wales, there are terrific onshore engineering skills, and there are good supply chain support from the Great Southwest. It matches the net zero contribution. It matches our local industrial strategy here, and fits with so many things, and I think will be one of the key starters for when we try to kickstart the economy. The critical market creation actions are underway, and indeed we've done very well with those, so we're really positioned. And our key areas now, as we start to move the industry forward, are ensuring that we do get that revenue support as a result of BEIS's invitation on the CFD consultation, that we start to think about how we work those zones and make the most of them, and last but not least, we use the business plan as our structure, if you like, for building out the sector. That's me just about concluded. I'll just say that in final conclusion, that you're very welcome to contact me. We're going to be really busy between now and the end of the month, so if you do, then if you could make it after the end of the month, that would be terrific. But overall, if I were to say one thing, I'm delighted with where we've got to. We're incredibly well positioned as a region. We've got the skills and the people to do it. We've got the political support. But furthermore, the timing just feels right. And having been in the offshore renewable sector for the last decade, the last 2 years have been a very interesting change of atmospherics. And it feels to me that the prospects are better than I've ever seen them in over a decade. Lisa, that's me finished. I can just look if there are any questions or potentially hand over.
Thanks very much, Steve. I think I'll hand over to Matt, who's going to assist with any Q&A that's coming through on the chat.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Thank you, Lisa. And good morning to everybody. We have had a few questions that have been coming in during that presentation, and I think we're managing to sort of answer those as we go. Let me just make sure that we're all on the same page with that. I'll just run through those. I think everybody can see the questions that come through, but just to sort of reiterate, we are looking to provide copies of presentations early next week. They will be available from the Marine Eye website, which is www.marine-eye.co.uk. I think I've got that right. Likewise, I think we said at the beginning that this particular session is being recorded, and we are looking to share that recording for anybody who wants it. And again, we'll follow up with details next week once we've spoken to. None of us are particularly technical when it comes to video conferencing, so we'll need to just check with our experts on how we're going to do that. And then the third question that came through, slightly more technical, looking at the water depth range at the Wave Hub site. I think Neil has very kindly answered that one. We're looking at 51, 57 meters. Again, there's more detailed information on the Wave Hub site, which I'm more happy to send a link through. Okay, so we have another question here. If I can just read this one through. No name with this one, but consenting any offshore wind project can take many years. Considering the now widely accepted concept of climate emergency, how has or how will be the consenting and licensing process be changed to expedite obtaining the relevant permits to allow construction to commence quicker than the old business as usual timeframes? A very relevant question. And Steve, do you want to take a a run
Yeah,
at that?
very happy to do that. Yeah, it's a very good question, and I'm also happy, Matt. I'll take the next two questions as well, as they're both relevant to me.
Cool.
You're right. Our concern is that the current consenting under business as usual is 7 to 8 years. We believe that it's possible to do that more quickly. It will require a different approach, but we believe that the fact that we've got a clean sheet of paper at in the Celtic Sea, because there's no deployment as such, may allow us to think that through. One of the options, and Matt is part of this, is Pembrokeshire Demonstration Zone, where we're actually talking already to National Resources Wales about how we might do this more quickly. So I think there will be ways of doing it. I don't want to say too much at the moment because we're starting to work up consents, but to my mind, we ought to be in a position where actually we're moving as quickly as we possibly can. And rather than 7 to 8 years, to my mind, we should be looking at 4 years at the most. What should be dictating this is how quickly we can move from an engineering and a finance point of view, and aligning ourselves as quickly as possible with that. Of interest, I recently had a briefing to Cornwall Local Nature Partnership about how we might do this more quickly, and they are as open to us as we are to that. I'm pleased to say as well that when we do divest the project to an offshore project developer, that Cornwall Council have asked us to reinvest the monies in the sector. So this is something that we will be looking at. As regards the company committing itself to the Wave Hub site, I wouldn't talk about that. It's commercial in confidence, but no, we're in the middle of a divestment process, and there will be a number of interested parties, and nothing will be announced until a transaction's closed. And last but not least, ERDF funding runs through to 2023. So both Pembrokeshire Demonstration Zone and Cornwall grant applications are for monies which runs through to the end of 2023. And as far as we understand, there's no impact to Brexit on that.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Just to sort of follow up on that. Obviously, ERDF's not the only show in town. Marine I2 is an ERDF funded project, so we are keen to support where we can. So I'll agree with Steve. Brexit doesn't have an impact on that, so we'll move on. I'd like to pick up Nick Elderfield's question. For supply chain looking to engage to support the future development, what's the best way? Is the industry cluster open to supply chain engagement? Absolutely. If we're asking what is the best way, I think we've said in some of the literature surrounding this event, let's not beat around the bush. This is a once in a generation opportunity for us to develop an industrial response to an industry that has the potential to grow both indigenously in the Celtic Sea, but then also there's a global export market as well. We are from a regional economic growth perspective thoroughly committed to ensuring that it's the supply chain here has every opportunity to rise up and meet the need. In fact, I would suggest that this particular event is the starting point for that. I think the best way is to ensure that we continue to have ongoing discussions. I think it's absolutely crucial that as a region we understand where the challenges are, and I'm sure our colleagues at Blue Gem will touch on that, and come up with the answers. And then once we know what we need to do, let's overcome those hurdles one at a time to ensure that in 2025 and beyond, it is the UK supply chain that is leading the world in this particular sector. So hopefully that answers your question, Nick. Another question just cropped in here from Lewis Lack. Good morning to you, Lewis. Hope you're well. Given that primary flow topologies are focused on semi-sub and barge due to their higher TRL score, is there any support for TLPs as they need funding to raise their TRL score? Simon Cheeseman, are you? This is probably
I'm here
for you, I think.
Yeah, morning everyone. Simon Cheeseman from the Offshore Renewable Energy Catapult. And in answer to that question there from Lewis, I think the focus on semi-sub and barge is driven by water depth and issues around there rather than TRL score. There's obviously support for TLPs, and there's a lot of work going on there. The Catapult last year launched its Floating Offshore Wind Centre of Excellence, and we'll be looking at different technologies there. So if you've got any particular issues around that, if you want to contact me separately outside of this webinar, I'll be happy to enter into a discussion. Thanks.
Okay. Oh, there we go. Thanks, Lewis. Right, we've got, how are we doing for time here? I think we've got time for a couple more.
You're okay. We're about 10 minutes ahead of schedule, so
okay.
We've still got a little bit of time.
Brilliant. Okay, so I've got a message from a question from Jesse. So since lead operators and investors will not yet be apparent, will there be a mechanism for identifying key technology gaps and supporting development communication across the operators, established or prospective? I'll start that one, and then I'm going to hand that on off to Steve and Simon, if I may. I'm going to throw it out there and say that sort of projects like Marine I2 have got a key part to play in helping identify key technology gaps, particularly when we are looking at the industrialization that we need to go through. So there are lots of questions that need to be answered in terms of balance of plant, in terms of installation, infrastructure, and operations. And oh, sorry, Philip. It's yeah, appreciate that. So Philip Strong asked this particular question from Reflex. Hi, Philip. Hope you're well. Yeah. So just coming back to my point. I think there is an opportunity, a huge opportunity actually, in working together to take a really good solid look at where we might be in 10 years' time, identify where the gaps are now, and backcast from that. I think that's the opportunity. Steve, Simon, would you like to jump in and comment as well?
Yeah, I think I'm not sure I agree with the premise of the question, which is lead operators and investors are not yet apparent. I think they are apparent, actually, and that's what makes the industry different. But I do think that there is still, it's right to say that there are technology gaps and issues to be solved. I think a lot of work's being done on it. So, for example, on my board at Wave Hub sits Deborah Greaves, who's the chair of Supergem, which is the British University's offshore renewables team. I know they for sure are looking at these things. Simon will no doubt talk a little bit about it. Yeah. But if you want the ultimate answer to this question is we've got to get to see and start to do these things. So to me, we know, if you like, some of the work, and the Carbon Trust work on the joint industry project has been very important, I think, into understanding the gaps. But there comes a stage where you've simply got to deploy at scale. And that's numbers of platform at sea, so we can start to understand those gaps better, and then start to drive down levelized cost of energy. So my mind, the answer is the pipeline ultimately, albeit making sure that the R&D support that we've got, and there's a fair bit of grant funding coming into the sector as well. So the R&D support we've got is focused onto areas that the industry knows it needs to solve. Simon.
Yeah, thanks very much. Hi, Philip. So the Catapult is sort of taking a national perspective on floating offshore wind and sort of managing things in Scotland and supporting activity down here in the southwest. The Offshore Wind Industry Council we're actually starting to develop the roadmaps that identify the technology gaps for floating offshore wind on behalf of the Offshore Wind Industry Council, and they will be sort of publicised fairly soon. But I think there's two issues. I think there's also a regional issue that if you look at deployment down here in the southwest, then there are regional features, regional supply chain issues that mean there are slight nuances within those technology gaps, particularly around operations and maintenance. And I think that's where the regional focus is really, really important, and the need to sort of galvanise the supply chain in the southwest and Wales to really start to home in on those particular issues and advise operators and investors in terms of what's the best way to deploy these very, very large systems. So there's stuff going on at a national level that will be publicised in due course, and the recommendation is get involved at the regional level as well to help inform that discussion.
Do you want to have a go at the next one, Matt? There's questions.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm assuming everyone can see these questions, so if I just run through them. So from Tom James, hi Tom, how are you? I understand that much of the technology currently used in floating offshore wind is adapted from oil and gas, for example, semi-sub platforms, cables. Could you comment on current work being done in development to optimize for floating wind and reduce capex and maintenance needs?
Yeah, I think I'd just gently challenge the premise of the question, which is that everything's adapted from oil and gas. I think that's true, but only in part. Because the other area of there are two other areas of adaptation. The first is from conventional offshore wind, and clearly everything above the water. But also, I think from the wave and tidal sector, not least of all some of the anchoring technologies. So I think we're coming from three areas. And I think there's been a lot of work done, but ultimately, and I think anchoring is going to be really important to understand how we do that. There's a very significant difference in doing anchoring a single large FPSO or similar in an oil and gas situation versus the amount of anchors required to support a 500 megawatt floating offshore wind deployment, which could be somewhere in the order of 150 anchors. And I think it's that difference in probably slightly smaller technologies, we may or may not know that, but actually undertaking a season or a deployment of something which could be between 150 and 300 anchors to support a 500 megawatt wind farm over 2 seasons. I think nobody really knows how to do that. And again, we can do a lot of work, but ultimately I think it's getting out at sea and installing, which is going to be the way that we're going to solve a lot of these problems, or understand a lot of these problems, I should say.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think if you want to sort of look at what is the key difference between oil and gas and floating offshore wind, or where floating offshore wind needs to be, by 2030, it's a bespoke specialist engineering project versus serial production and the ability to produce energy at a price. I suspect that our colleagues at Blue Gem will touch at that, so I'll move on. I know that. Okay, I know that. So I'm looking at the chat here. I'm multitasking, so therefore I'm running at about 20% efficiency. I understand that not all of the audience can see all of the questions, so during the next presentation I will try and resolve that. But in the meantime, I will read them out and try and answer them at the same time. So we've got a few minutes left. Lisa, is that all right? We've got a few more we could deal with.
Yes, another 5 minutes, and then I think we'll move on.
All right. So Sean Finley asks, who carried out the constraints mapping that Steve referred to in his presentation? Is it a statutory planning guideline? Our colleagues at the Catapult actually commissioned that, and it was, has been used to help support responses to the Southwest Marine Plan. It is not a statutory planning guideline. It is a document which helps us identify where exploitable areas are. Just going to pick up Adam Tucker's question around what considerations are being made to future O&M. For example, are flow foundations being developed to be capable of being towed to port for O&M to reduce offshore working? Is supply chain, are third parties being engaged for this, or are these being looked at internally only? How can we best engage to share experiences from fixed bottom projects? I think that is a really, really interesting question. Actually gets to the crux of I think what we have the opportunity to do over the next few years. If I may, I think if we get through the Blue Gem presentation, Adam, I suspect that might give some context that we can use in the later session. So if we can hold that question off, I think we'd like to come back to it. If we don't, please flag it up and we make sure we do. We've got quite a few questions coming through on the chat.
Do you want to take the one on O&M, Matt?
Yeah, I think we've just covered that one.
Oh, sorry.
We've got a bunch of questions here. Sorry, I'm just looking at the catch. They're coming through on different things. So I'll just pick up the question on incentives in place to attract regional inward investment, thinking potentially of OEMs, developers, technology providers, etc. Has there been any talk of establishing floating offshore wind enterprise zones, for example? So Cornwall has a very strong inward investment team in place. I know a couple of my colleagues are actually in on this call. And we are working with the DIT potentially towards enhancing that in the next few months. So we do have enterprise zones in Cornwall, including in Hale and Tolbaden and Falmouth. So and clearly that covers areas where there could be floating offshore wind activity. So I think that hopefully covers that. I think we are probably getting to a point where we probably need to wrap this up for now and move on to the Blue Gem presentation. Keep the questions coming. They are flooding in, which is fantastic. That's the point of these events, to engage, and we do have a reasonable amount of time scheduled towards the end of the session for answering those. Anything we can't answer today or we don't get to today, we do have copies of these, and we will follow up with responses, and potentially there's always the opportunity for follow-up discussions to cover off certain areas. So if I could just ask Steve and Simon just to sort of close off this session for now, and then Lisa, it'll be back to you.
Yeah, sure. No, I'll be very quick and just say I think it's an incredibly exciting time. We have almost all of the capabilities we need, not necessarily at the right scale. But there was one of the questions asked, I think, was about supply chain. I just wanted to reinforce that as we develop the business plan for the region, we absolutely do intend to actually reach out to the supply chain and engage the supply chain fully within this, because we're absolutely determined to actually maximize the economic and jobs opportunities. It's worth bearing in mind the offshore wind sector still asks for 6% British content in future offshore wind. And we've got no better place to start to think about how we might do that than the Celtic Sea.
And then just from me, just to say that the offshore renewable energy catapult is operating both in the north through our headquarters in Glasgow and our operations in Aberdeen, and also down here in the southwest through the Cornwall office that I run, and also our Marine Energy Engineering Centre of Excellence in Pembrokeshire in Wales. Okay, thanks.
Okay, thanks for that, Steve, and thanks for the informative presentation, and also thanks to the delegates and the panelists for the good discussion afterwards. It's great to see these web events working well with participation from the audience too. Okay, I think we're ready to move on to our second guest speaker today. We have Hugh Kelly, and following that, David Jones from Blue Gem. I hand over to you, Hugh.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Let me just share my screen. Has that gone into full screen mode?
Yes, that looks good to me.
Okay, great. I'd like to start by reiterating what Steve has said. This is an incredibly exciting time for the industry, for floating offshore wind, and for the Southwest and the Celtic Sea. My name is Hugh Kelly. I'm a director of Simply Blue Energy and the project managing director of Blue Gem Wind, which is our joint venture between Simply Blue Energy and Total. I'll be sharing this session with David Jones, who's our stakeholder director. He's based in Pembroke, and many of you will know him from his time at MEW. I think in the audience we also have Christoph Harwood, who's our Director of Policy and Strategy. I'm not sure whether under Zoom he can contribute if there are questions later, but he's in the background also. The opening image is a striking one. It's a picture of one of Principal Power's floating platforms with a 2 megawatt turbine being towed out to sea. And hopefully our intention is, and our hope is, that we'll be seeing many of these being towed out into the Celtic Sea in the years to come. It's worth keeping in mind that that's only a 2 megawatt turbine. We, as Steve said, are now talking about 10 to 15 megawatt turbines. The scale is truly phenomenal. So I thought it might be worth just giving you a little bit of background on Simply Blue Energy. For those of you who don't know us, forgive me for those who have heard some or large parts of this story before. Simply Blue Energy was a company that I and Sam Roach Perks founded in 2011. We are old college friends, engineers who studied together in the last century. And he's a property developer. I was in international business, and in 2011, we decided that we wanted to do something together that would make a difference, something that we'd be proud of on our headstones. And so we founded Simply Blue Energy and began beavering away on the opportunities in the Southwest, particularly around wave energy. We're now, I noticed as I was doing these slides, we're now 15 people. A month ago we were 12, and we expect to be more again by the end of it next month. So very exciting time for us, with offices now, not just in Ireland, but also in Cornwall, Pembroke and Edinburgh. And we, as I said, we initially started with a focus on wave. That brought us over to Cornwall and to Wave Hub. And it was there that we began to understand more fully the opportunities that the Southwest presented. And in 2018, while retaining our interest in wave, we switched our shorter term focus to the opportunities in offshore wind. I believe Ben Gowers may be on the call. Amongst others, many of you will recognize him as an early champion of floating offshore wind, and indeed the opportunities for the Southwest. Early on, we established a close relationship with Principal Power. We had identified that they had one of the more advanced floating, semi-sub floating platform technologies. There are many others being developed. Ideal has been referred to earlier on by Steve, and I'm absolutely certain that in a number of years' time, we'll see many different types of floating platforms commercialized and on the market. We've also established a close relationship with Core Power on the wave side. We see wave as still having significant potential, but just a little bit later. And we also have an aquaculture division, staying consistent with our theme to be blue economy developers. And our aquaculture division is led by SBE Director and Director of Policy and Strategy, Christoph Harwood, who I mentioned earlier. Now, the next image is one that everybody on this call is going to be very familiar with, and I only put it up just as a contextual image. This is our hunting ground. This is the opportunity we see. This is the Saudi Arabia of floating offshore wind that we perceive. Christoph likes to liken it to looking out from Aberdeen in 1965 at the opportunity in the North Sea. But this time the opportunity, just as big, is in renewables and in floating offshore wind. We, in addition to the report that Steve mentioned, we also commissioned a study into the opportunity in the Celtic Sea. We commissioned ITPE to try and quantify for us what they saw as the opportunity for floating offshore wind in the Celtic Sea. This was the conclusion of their study. Now, obviously all of this can't be realized. That would simply not be practical or realistic. But if we were to take a figure of 10 to 20%, you can see that the estimate is anywhere from 15 to 50 gigawatts, consistent with what Steve mentioned earlier on. So the opportunity is very, very significant. It is truly significant for the Southwest and very, very exciting. So the potential for offshore wind is well recognised. We know about Scotland. It's received most of the airtime to date. And as Steve mentioned, largely with fixed offshore wind. And fixed offshore wind is mostly a Scottish and a North Sea story. But floating is really what offers the potential at Southwest, as that report highlights. But here's the challenge, and this is the challenge we see. How can we develop this huge opportunity by making sure the Southwest enjoys the benefits? So this goes straight to the heart of the questions that were being asked earlier about supply chain. We've aligned with and worked closely with industry throughout the development of our projects, which have been going on for some time, although we've clearly only gone public more recently. We've been delighted to work closely with ORE Catapult, with Steve and the Cornish LEP, with Claire Perry and the Floating Wind Task Force, with our UK, and of course with the Crown Estate and BEIS and the Welsh Government and NRW. And we were involved in the instigation of the Celtic Sea Alliance, and we're working with the Celtic Sea Cluster. And the answer to securing the benefit for the Southwest is the stepping stone strategy, in our opinion. It's one that we've pushed, and we've enjoyed the support of Steve and all of the other players in this, that we need to develop in stepping stones so that the supply chain can develop in parallel and keep up. So our first project that we want to contribute to that stepping stone is our 96 megawatt Erebus demonstration project, which I'll say a little bit more about a couple of slides on. We have ambitions to build another one after that, a larger project, still perhaps regarded as pre-commercial. And we're confident that if we don't, that after that there will be commercial projects developed, more commercial projects, and that the industry will be humming. And the benefits won't only be local. The Celtic Sea can obviously play a big role in developing net zero, something that, as was mentioned earlier, is perhaps now and rightfully higher up our priorities list after our COVID wake-up call. Such urgent problems we can't continue to ignore them at our peril. So in summary, we see the 2020s as the opportunity to build a supply chain and scale in the Celtic Sea, so that in the 2030s, we can build out capacity. So I'm now the project managing director of Blue Gem Wind. That's my job. Blue Gem is the joint venture between Simply Blue Energy and Total New Technologies. It was really difficult to keep this a secret. I was so relieved when the 4th of March came around, and then I was told that we had to wait another 2 weeks. It was incredibly difficult to keep in. It's very exciting for us. We're delighted to have Total as a partner. They're a super partner. We're working really well together, and they've made a great commitment to the Celtic Sea and to our vision for the Blue Gem Wind portfolio. As I've mentioned, Project Erebus is in the public domain now, and I'm happy to answer questions on that, and I'm sure there will be many as after the session. And all do is indicate that we have plans beyond that also at this stage. I've had a note up saying my internet connection is unstable, so after the Explorer ship that was by my name, I got a Christmas present in 2018. I think it was the site is located about 45 kilometers from Pembroke. It'll feature, depending on the scale of the turbine, and hundreds of millions of pounds. The capex will run into hundreds of millions. It presents substantial opportunities for fabrication, balance of plant, ancillaries, commissioning, deployment, operations and maintenance for between 15 and 25 years, and one day decommissioning. And already before that, the opportunities have opened up, and we are employing local consulting companies who are working with the pre-front-end engineering design phase of the project. As a project, we're very committed to this local supply chain, and in a moment I'm going to hand over to Dave, who's going to talk a little bit more about that. But in seeking revenue support mechanisms, we have specifically articulated our commitment to the supply chain. But to fulfill that commitment, we do need the supply chain to start working with us now, and to understand, for us to understand what it can do for us. By the time of AR5, the CFD auction that we hope to participate in with this project in 2023, we need to be in a position to accurately price the work that we will need done. And that's why we need to engage with the supply chain now. And to live the project quickly thereafter, we need the supply chain to be ready. So in answer to some of the earlier questions, we are very open to engaging as soon as possible with as many relevant parties in the supply chain as possible. OWC are working with us as principal designers presently, ably assisted by ITP and Marine Space. To give you a little bit of insight into some of the other work we're doing at the moment, HIDEF, who I believe are on the call as well, began our bird and marine mammal surveys last October 19, and we are about to award the tenders for both our wind and oceanographic survey campaigns and our geophysical survey campaigns, which are both very substantial pieces of work and will continue for some time. I'm going to use this slide as my handover now to Dave. It's just a picture of one of the PPI, Principal Power wind float platforms, to give you some idea of scale and how exciting this opportunity is. Dave, over to you.
Thank you, Hugh. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to take you through the next few slides. What I may do is switch off my video, which may save on some bandwidth. So I'll try that first and take you through the remaining few slides. Just bear with me. I've got a slight delay on my slide skipping through there. Just bear with me for a second while my computer catches up. While enjoying the challenges of online webinars. I'm going to throw a caveat in here actually before I begin. One in capital letters actually. This is my second week of joining the company. Incredibly excited to be involved in a project like this and the projects that will follow on. My second caveat, also in capital letters, is I'm not an engineer. However, we do have an incredible team of engineers working in the background. I can qualify for putting a chain on my bicycle, and that's about it as far as engineering goes. But I'm here as a stakeholder manager to engage with the sector, to engage with the supply chain, and I'll be doing that based on a previous 10 years of working for initially Marine Energy Pembrokeshire and Marine Energy Wales. So I thought I would go through a couple of points of what we've done to date, and it's still relatively early in our journey, certainly as Blue Gem Wind, but as Hugh mentioned, project offices in Newquay and Pembroke Dock, and as Steve's talked about, and also Hugh as well, we've been supporting that whole regional cross-border initiatives. We've heard about the Celtic Sea Alliance and also the Celtic Sea Cluster, members of Marine Energy Wales and the Cornwall Marine Network. We also supported the offshore renewable energy catapult supply chain study that we've heard about this morning. We're able to feed in some key data into that report, and also being involved in events and workshops moving forward. And yeah, already mentioned with the support for the ministerial submission that Steve talked about earlier on this morning. Other areas that we've been working in, we're supporting Pembroke Dock Marine. This is part of the Swansea Bay City deal. Again, Steve talked about this very, very briefly. This is a £60 million project. There are 4 pillars to that. all of them interesting to us, in particular around about £30 million investment into infrastructure at the Port of Milford Haven. Steve talked about the Pembrokeshire Demonstration Zone as well. That's also a pillar in that. We're also involved in a number of collaborative projects. Just a couple of examples here is the Milford Haven Energy Kingdom project, which is looking at a hydrogen model for the future and a hydrogen business model, which obviously includes potentially floating wind. And also involved in the South Wales Industrial Cluster, which is a cluster in South West Wales that is looking at net zero and decarbonising the heavy industry that we have here. So people involved in that cluster is RWE, Valero Power Station, Tata Steel, those kinds of people. And again, they're seeing the potential for floating wind to not only provide perhaps low carbon megawatts, but also being involved in decarbonising and them decarbonising their projects and their processes. We commissioned a port study. There's a number of reasons to do that. A, it was to obviously understanding as now, but also to build engagement with the ports and to potentially stimulate upgrades. Again, we'll be working with partners to progress that study as we move forward. I think this has been mentioned as well. We've commissioned work at the Celtic Sea level, which is obviously helps with the messaging. It helps us have an overall vision for the Celtic Sea. That's include resource mapping that has been talked about. Also very, very recently, system benefits and looking at the delays between wind resource in the Celtic Sea versus wind resource in the North Sea, and just other potential system benefits to the delay in those weather systems. Hugh's already talked about this, but yeah, development contracts to a number of SMEs in the Southwest already, and really looking forward to continuing that process of doing that. I'm going to spend the next few minutes just talking about a development agency workshop that we held with the Welsh Government recently, but also the Cornwall LEP, Cornwall Development Council, the Catapult and Pembrokeshire County Council. Some of the areas that we talked about and some of the areas that came from the Catapult slides, is project development. We already have strong areas and strengths in this region across the Southwest, where project development, surveys, engineering design, where there is limited or no investment required, and where there are highly exportable skills. We're keen to engage and see where we can progress with, particularly around the strengths that we already have. We talked about manufacturing, and there's a couple of elements of that. There's the components. There's a range of components that go into wind float. They can be manufactured around the world and assembled in local locations. And this means that local companies, particularly with the stepping stone ethos, do have a chance to develop their skills and build those up as the projects get larger. We obviously need a more granular understanding of which components have the greatest potential for local production. And again, some of the actions that came out of the development workshop that we had is, working with OREC and the Celtic cluster team to just understand about the components, the manufacturing and the opportunities. We also talked about fabrication, again, another manufacturing opportunity. And the strategy to this is, there's a couple of options, obviously. We're looking, do you look at a single port or do you look at a decentralized model? And we believe the decentralized model would allow the Celtic cluster region to contribute more supply chain without having to go, in inverted commas, all out on infrastructure investment. So there's again, we will be working through all of these as we go. And again, it's really important for us to work through it with the key development partners in the Celtic Sea. We talked about assembly. Obviously, securing assembly content is going to be really highly dependent on available infrastructure. Whilst the Simply Blue Energy port study is very helpful, it helps us identify options for assembly in the region. Again, it's worked really nicely, I think, with the Catapult study as well. But what it has identified is that there needs to be investment in the ports, if we're going to capture the biggest benefits we possibly could. But we also realise that, for the supply chain and for ports to be comfortable in making these required investments, we need a portfolio and we need a pipeline of projects. We also talked about deployment. I know that was one of the questions that came up previously. To date, the platforms They can be dry towed or wet towed long distances, and there is the possibility that some of these platforms could be towed into the Celtic Sea ports from outside of the region. We're going to need initially 8 platforms required for Erebus. So it may or may not be the case that all of the work will be carried out in one area. So again, there's opportunities for ports to collaborate and work together to maximise the opportunity that we have for this. And obviously, if the cluster region is successful in securing assembly work, then it would make sense that the deployment could follow. There's opportunities around mooring lines, chains, anchors and piles, which are significant. And also, we talked about deployment and operations and maintenance. Floating wind will bring significant opportunities. You could argue that O&M is likely to be one of the easiest supply chain opportunities to secure in the regions. We are in the Celtic Sea, we are in close proximity to the projects. And again, that's a real opportunity for us. So again, we see this as an area where we need to work together moving forward. Really, really important. And I'm hoping my slides are running in tandem. I'm getting a slight delay on my screen. Apologies for the delay. We will get there, I'm sure. Any of the panel members, are the slides running in sync?
Just a slight delay, but so we've just gone through the supply chain opportunity one, and I see you're on next steps now. Perfect.
We're back in sync. So for us as a company, we've talked about the Celtic Sea cluster, we've talked about the Celtic Sea lines. That's really, really important for us. And we've mentioned this already, the UK content and the ambition to get to 60% before 2030. We do realise as supply chain, we need to see a development pathway. We need to see a pipeline of projects. We are hoping Erebus is just the beginning. So we will be developing and continuing our stakeholder engagement, developing a credible supply chain plan. But again, I can't say this enough, collaboration is really important to maximising the supply chain opportunities right across the region and right throughout the Celtic Sea. But we do need a route to market. I know Steve talked about the CFD earlier on. We do need a Celtic Sea leasing round if we're going to unlock some of the larger projects coming down the line. But again, and this is where the supply chain will play an important part in this, we need, if there is a route to market, we feel like there's one coming, then we need to collaborate on securing the CFD and securing the CFD at a competitive price. And I believe that is that. So thank you very much for listening. Apologies about the slight delay. I was completely losing the slides on my screen. I'm not sure it was like on your screen, but yeah, happy to take some questions. Again, just with a nod to the caveat, I've been in my role for 2 weeks now, but I do realise that Christoph and Hugh are also on the line. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you very much, Hugh and Dave there. And I think I'll pass back to Matt and Simon, who again are now fully versed on the Q&A chat function to assist us with any questions that are coming forward.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. And thank you, Hugh, and thank you, David, for the presentation. And I know you're around for some questions. My understanding is we can see, I think we, the panelists, can see all of the questions, but I'm not sure that the delegates can see the questions we're being asked until they've been answered. I think that's how it is. So we will read them out in a traditional manner. We'll get good at this Zoom stuff by the time we all emerge from our caves in 2023. So Hugh, there's one for you here if you're happy to take it. So congrats to you and the rest of the team at Simply Blue. Do you have a sense of where the relevant construction and O&M bases might be for the Erebus project?
So part of our pre-feed work is determining what exactly and tying down in greater detail exactly what our requirements are. We would hope to have determined that in a preliminary way by the middle of June. And indeed, we committed to share that with ORE Catapult and a number of other people after our engagement in Wales, the supply chain workshop that David referred to. I think that people need to be aware of the scale of these devices and the opportunity, if I could put it as an opportunity, not as a problem. That means that whatever our solution will be, it'll be a multi-port solution. There's lots of parts, lots of moving parts to these. They're huge. Different things happen at different speeds. For example, construction and assembly takes longer than deployment. So unless you want vessels that are there to deploy hanging around idle, you've got to, come up with, you've got to try and come up with solutions to address that. So this will be a multi-port solution with multiple opportunities.
Thanks, Hugh. And would it be fair to say, I suspect that that maybe when you get to this point in June, that maybe there will be some more questions to answer, and clearly that's the challenge for the region is to pull together to work out how we best answer those questions, within the time frame that you guys and potentially other developers will be working to.
Sure. There was a reference there to a port study that we did. We looked at 4 ports initially: Falmouth, Milford Haven, Port Talbot, and we also looked at Cork. We shared those port studies with the relevant ports because we need to give them sight on what we need them to do and in what way we need them to scale up and what's it going to look like in with as much notice as possible.
Sure.
It's fair to say there's no port at the moment that could do it all.
No.
There is much work to be done, and different work in different ports.
And just picking up on one of the other questions which we received, which references that port study, an anonymous NT interested to know when that might be available. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm guessing that's commercial in confidence and is an internal report for your own needs. Yeah,
it is. I'd love to know who asked.
Okay, so I'll put it anonymous attendee. If you're feeling brave, let us know who you are, and we'll share. We'll put you in contact with you and David and Christoph.
Okay. The Catapult supply chain study also mentions ports, but that's just a referral to capabilities at the moment.
Just Matt, on the supply chain study, and I'm sure Christoph will come in here. We did share it back with the ports and gave them, another opportunity to feed in, and shared non-confidential parts of it with the development agencies as well. As we talked about before, collaboration's key. It's a word I've used for a number of times over the last decade, and it really is true at the moment.
Okay, I'll just pick up this last question, and then just so nobody gets bored with hearing my drony voice too much, I'll hand off to Simon for a couple. This is from Michael Hook, who's actually been quite specific around current engagement that they've got with you. But if I can generalise it, I think the question is, do members of the supply chain who could provide input into the design stage, should they be opening dialogue with OWC directly, or are you still talking to Dave in the first instance?
No, it's a great question. Please open dialogue with us and with OWC. The worst result we could have is that somebody slips through and that they haven't been included on a tender list. We must avoid that.
Perfect. Thanks, Hugh. Simon, do you want to take a view?
Yep. Thanks very much, Matt. Next question on the list is from Patrick. Thanks very much, Patrick, and asks about the role that we see in terms of robotics and autonomy industries. How can they play a part in flow projects, specifically in regards to O&M? I'll answer that initially from a Catapult perspective, and then I can hand off to Blue Gem Wind if they want to pick up that. We're looking very seriously at how autonomous systems can play a part, certainly at the moment in fixed bottom offshore wind. and that naturally then feeds into floating offshore wind. With the the sort of technology being a different order of magnitude in terms of sort of accessibility and things like that. We've actually got a report coming out in the next couple of months on this very issue of support of robotic systems, particularly autonomous surface vessels and unmanned surface vessels supporting offshore wind. So, we do see, personally within the Catapult, we see a future role for autonomous systems, very much so. But I'll hand over to anyone from Blue Gem who wants to sort of pick up on that point.
I'll jump in because I think the other two won't want to. I can't add anything to that answer for the moment, I'm afraid, Simon. We haven't given it a huge amount of consideration at this point.
I mean, just to note, it was something that obviously you picked up in the Catapult study that labour is generally more expensive in the UK than elsewhere. Labour-intensive processes like substructure manufacture might not be economic, but the whole innovative automated facilities might be an area that we could close the gap on that. But obviously, that's definitely more of the Catapult bag than ours, I think.
Yeah, and that's the sort of discussion we're having with a lot of the OEMs about sort of how they automate the manufacturing processes in the future. And that has a direct consequence then on your sort of operations and maintenance, particularly for in-turbine type activities and things like that. And the general feeling at the moment is that for the turbine manufacturers is about more commissioning onshore than offshore, and less sort of human intervention offshore in the future is the general sort of trend. But that's quite a long way in the future. Okay, one from Jess to Hugh. What do you see as the key technology risks for the first phase of the Erebus development?
I'm not sure that we see specific technology risks. I mean, we're pretty confident in our floater. We're very confident in our turbine suppliers and those that we're talking to. In terms of cabling, obviously we need to take account of geophysical and geotechnical features, but that's all within the capabilities that exist already. We would be pretty bullish about the technology. We do have an ambition to push the envelope in terms of using a larger turbine, and that's part of our test and demonstration commitment to the Crown Estate under this leasing. What we are aiming for is a larger floater and larger turbines than have ever been deployed before. So I guess there's inherent risk in those. But yeah, they're just being managed as part of any engineering project. We don't see any sort of, we're not planning on using anything that hasn't been invented yet or hasn't been thought about yet.
Yeah, just to sort of kind of follow up on that, and maybe with one eye on, you haven't built Erebus yet, but with one eye on what comes after that. Is it, and we've talked about the stepping stone approach, is there a sort of view on where the challenges might be once we get to the, multiples of tens of turbines, and how we might answer some of those questions as part of the Erebus build out?
Yeah, I think as I think a little bit more about the question, I suppose, and it goes back to one we've already addressed, one of the big challenges is undoubtedly the ports. And it's the scale of these devices. The nacelle on top of a 12 megawatt turbine is 600 plus tons. There's only so many cranes can lift that at the moment. There's only so many dock sides that can hold that weight. You're talking about servicing a floating platform. That means it's moving. Fixed bottom, it's very helpful. It's not moving. The floater is. Even if it's brought into shallow water, there's considerations there. So those are probably the technical aspects that we're spending the most time on at the moment. And they will only increase in number, obviously, as you said, as Matt, as the industry gets bigger. One day, Principal Power would like to see a wind float going out every 2 weeks.
Yeah. I'm just going to pick up on ports because whilst we've been asking the last few questions, Peter Crone, who's on this call, hi Peter, thanks for engaging, who was involved in the original development of Atlantic Array, has where they did a comprehensive port study, which happy to share with us. So thank you, Peter. He indicated he's happy for me to put that out to everybody. So thank you very much for that. I just thought I'd put that one in now. Simon, do you want to take the next one?
Yeah, my questions seem to be flipping about a little bit, but the next one I can see is from Corinne, who asks about what solutions are being put in place to ensure that there are enough UK fabrication supplies available to meet the demand for foundations. And I suppose from our perspective, this is one of the issues that we're looking at, and one of the reasons that we're starting to have these discussions is to start to look at these sort of issues and understand what is the UK supply chain critical mass capable of achieving. But I'll hand over to someone from Blue Gem if they want to pick up on that.
Christoph, would you like to answer that?
You're muted,
yeah.
Christoph.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the challenge we have at the moment is clearly we're very focused on Erebus and the challenges for Erebus, but also the whole point of the stepping stone strategy is that there should be a number of projects getting us into the 2030s. I mean, Steve has spoken about Wave Hub and also other ones and PTZ, and so it's not just us in the Celtic Sea. I think what we would expect is perhaps below 60% content initially, as the supply chain may not be ready, but by the time we get to 2030s, because that target of 60% content is the target for 2030, is not targets for the 2020s. We would expect there'll be a lot of catch up for the UK supply chain coming through. Clearly, there is a huge government desire to see this, and if you read the CFD consultation, there's a lot in there about supply chain plans. Currently, if you are a project of less than 300 megawatts, you do not have to put in a supply chain plan. But the government is saying, should they reduce that from 300 megawatts down? And we are saying, yes, we support that because we think it is important to include as much UK content as we can. So I think that the clear message is there's a big focus coming at all levels from local, from the whole Celtic Sea and all around the UK on supply chain. But it does require a lot of investment in supply chain companies and locations to get out there to get that content. And the thing that always slightly staggers me is the lead time to get things done. Talking to one of the ports the other day, they're saying it's 2 years to get planning permission to start investing in new facilities in their docks. 2 years is a long time when we're trying to put a supply chain plan together for April 23 in order to submit that into the CFD consultation. Okay, thanks very much, Christoph. Questions from James, providing contact details for Hugh and David. Yeah, we'll give a link to the best way to contact those guys afterwards. Then the last question I've got on my list is again from our anonymous attendee. Wondering if Blue Gem, oh sorry, no, there's one before that from Will, I do apologise. Looking at alternatives to steel, and has there been any consideration of lower maintenance products like GRP composites? Catapult's actually got a number of projects looking particularly at GRP use and other materials use for turbines in particular, particularly around sort of reliability and weight reduction as well. So there are some studies that we're doing into those matters, particularly with the National Composite Centre and also with the Research Academy that we've got with Bristol University. But I'll hand over to Blue Gem to see if they want to comment on that question.
Simon, we haven't looked at it particularly. Our focus is really project development rather than technology. So we scour for the best technologies to use, but we're leaving it to our technology developers and to people better qualified like yourselves to look at that.
Okay, thanks very much, Hugh. Next question I can see is from our anonymous attendee, and maybe they're based in Ireland, I don't know. They're just wondering if Blue Gem would like to see as much UK-Irish supply chain collaboration as possible.
Christoph, I suggest again.
Yeah, I mean, there's this interesting dilemma because we see the Celtic Sea as a company as being one basin where we would want to optimize the supply chain from the UK into Ireland and the Ireland into UK. You know, there is a big opportunity, and as Hugh was saying, it doesn't mean that one port will clear up and do everything. So we see a huge opportunity for supply chains from both countries. There is, however, the UK content, and it is UK content that is something that the Offshore Wind Industry Council has said it will target 60% by 2030. And I know Enterprise Ireland is concerned about that. However, I do think there's an interesting conversation to have, because clearly if Ireland is looking to support from UK companies, or UK companies would like to operate in Ireland, then and we are being seen to exclude them from UK projects because of that 60% content. I'm sure there's a dialogue we could have, and that is one of the interesting roles, I think, of the Celtic Sea Alliance. If you remember, the alliance is different to the cluster. The alliance includes Ireland, and we are having a conversation about what is the synergies in the Celtic Sea that has by bringing Ireland into the story with the huge resource that we can see in Irish waters in the Irish part of the Celtic Sea.
If I can just pick up from that, and there's Alex Gaunt's just popped in during that answer, asking how Irish suppliers can get involved early. With my CDC hat on, and knowing I've got colleagues from CTI on this line, we would be delighted to talk to any Irish suppliers who want to establish a footprint in the UK. We have a fantastic soft landing offer, and we'd be delighted to help bridge that gap by getting people over here and getting a presence in the UK. So that is a blatant sell. I make no apologies for that. And there's one comment left which we need to pick up. Before we get to that though, because I think it's something which is worth comment. There is a question on the chat which might not be clear to everyone, but Hugh, for you, from Greg C, are Total assisting with marine and engineering services given their experience in oil and gas, specifically mooring and subsea cables? It's a fairly direct question.
Yes. So the Blue Gem Wind team is made up of people from Simply Blue Energy and from Total. And our hull and moorings package lead is from Total, Benoit Grovel, and we tap in to Total's expertise whenever we can, because we'd be mad not to.
Okay, so we've got one question left, which is a comment from an anonymous attendee. I suspect there's probably more than one anonymous attendee, so it's rather than one person. So the panel is disappointingly lacking in diversity. Fair comment. I'm looking at a bunch of white middle-aged men, so I think that is a very, very fair comment. Goes on to say that if we're going to tackle a problem as big as climate change, we need real diversity of thought in the workforce. I agree, we need to avoid groupthink at all costs, and it would be great to see that reflected in exciting industries such as this one, particularly while considering development skills and jobs in the area. I think that I think with hindsight, I think that is a very fair comment. If I can reassure our attendee from a Marine Eye perspective, we do have a reasonable amount of gender diversity through our team. There's Lisa. Now that's helped slightly. It is recognised that it is an industry problem still. I guess all of us on the panel have been around for several years, where maybe diversity within marine industries was not where it should have been then, and probably isn't now. So I'm not sure if we've got Steve Taylor has been on the call.
Could I jump in there just as
well?
well?
Please do, Hugh. Yeah,
please. So the head of the development of Total Renewables Offshore is a lady. The board of 5 people that I report to in Blue Gem Wind, 2 of them are ladies. Our projects director in Ireland is a lady. Our senior project manager in Ireland is a lady. And we would hope to have 2 more ladies joining our team before the end of this month. So I hope that reassures the attendee that we're certainly conscious of the value of a more diversified team.
Yeah, same here. 2 of my 5 non-executive directors are ladies as well.
Yeah, I think taking on the final point there, that when we're considering development skills and jobs in the area, we've said it several times, I think, through the course of today. We're talking about an industry which will accelerate in the 2030s. It's 10 years from now. So tomorrow's project managers are today's sort of 5th formers. So I know that within the Marine Eye project, we've got Cornwall College Group, who are working directly with that crucial age group. I know Steve Taylor, I don't think is able to comment at the moment, but certainly we take that area of development very, very seriously. I know the LEP particularly takes development skills very, very seriously, and I think the only thing we can do is reflect on that's a very fair comment, and we would agree that we do need to make sure that we consider that when we're developing skills and jobs in the areas. So thank you for the comment. I'll just say Steve Taylor has jumped in, so thanks for the mention. And they have had success increasing numbers of young ladies and girls on their marine engineering and boat building courses. So it's probably a general part of a thrust to try and increase the numbers of girls who look at maths, science, technology, generally speaking.
From a catapult perspective, we've got 3 ladies on our board, and then from an engineering perspective, a lot of our engineers, at least a third, if not half, are female, and we're seeing a lot of female graduates coming through the system now into the sector, which is really encouraging.
We've got one more question has popped in, and I will. What is the lifespan of a floating turbine? Who wants to take that one?
I'd say it's the same. I'm happy to take it, but it'd be the same as a fixed turbine. I think the interesting question is what's the lifetime of a floating floater? That's the interesting question, because it's what, and will we be, whether they're concrete or whether they're steel, open question. Doesn't really matter now because we're talking about something which is happening in 25 years time, but that'll be the interesting question, because could we just repurpose the floaters with new turbines in 25 years time and get 50 years life out of them? Why wouldn't we want to do that? Open question.
Hugh, I saw that you unmuted just before Steve spoke. Have you got, I mean, presumably you've got a view on what the lifespan of those turbines, those floaters you're potentially going to use for Erebus are going to be. Is that something that you can share, or?
We're designing for 20-25 years, but I think Steve put us, he said exactly what I was going to say. It's more about the floaters. And only time will tell. At the moment, it's theory, obviously.
I believe we had Lloyd's Registered was potentially on the delegate list for this, so potentially a little bit of work on what happens when you get to 25 years and how do you extend it, but maybe cross that bridge when we get to it. So let me just take another look. Okay.
Just while you're looking there, Matt, I'll just qualify one point. I know there's been a little point that you've had one female on the call and that she hasn't said a lot. So just to clarify, my role in the project is as project manager of Marine Eye. So I'm here to manage the whole ERDF part of the project and the partnership within that. I'm not an expert in floating offshore wind. I help coordinate these sessions and set them up, which is why the sort of experts have been brought in as guest speakers to both speak and answer questions specifically around these areas. If you do have questions around, obviously, the Marine Eye project, I'm happy to get involved there. Thanks.
Thanks, Lisa, and thanks. Oh, Lisa, there's something just popped up in the chat. I'll let you take that one because I think that's a Marine Eye.
Where we are.
Jane Richards.
From Jane. I've been volunteering as a Marine Ambassador for Cornwall Marine Network since the scheme started. This involves engaging with schools and students to enthuse them about careers in marine, which is great. Jane is one of our Marine Eye team members and is from the Cornwall Marine Network. And that's exactly the sort of thing that will help to diversify and to create interest in this sector and in creating jobs in this sector. And just another point, I noticed at our launch event when we had Cornwall College there back in March at the launch event for Marine Eye, they were particularly keen to follow up afterwards about some of these emerging sectors that are coming forward, because for them, they want to know what to tell the 16-year-olds of today to go and train in. What is going to be the next big thing? Where are the jobs going to be? Where is the interest going to be? And tying that whole piece up, they've got a key part to play in keeping abreast of what the new and emerging technologies are, so that they can look at courses and advise 16-year-olds of today who are coming out of school as to what to do for career progression and what areas to get interested in. And it's great having them as a partner here to link that whole piece up and hopefully try and create some change and energy around that.
Matt, just to add as well, we're in early conversations with MEW and PCF locally about helping deliver sustainability and this sector into the local curriculum as well. Those so not just universities and A-level level, but actually getting into younger areas as well to get them enthused in the sector.
Matt, can I just make a general? I think it's so important what Lisa is saying about clearly enthusing the children today for projects in the 2020s and the 2030s. We still have some work to do with the politicians, and I think it's very important that everybody on the call who talks to politicians, who talks with stakeholders, realize that we're not there yet. We have 3 asks that went in from the industry last year. One is revenue support, which is coming through, we hope, through the CFD consultation, but it is not in the bag, and the CFD, the way the CFD designed is it's a tap you can turn on and you can turn off. And so support on that is really important. Secondly, we need projects. We need leasing rounds. We need more projects taking us out. A leasing round that started next year would probably not have projects, technology in the water until the 2030s. This is a huge lead time. And then thirdly, we need support on infrastructure upgrade, whether it's ports, docks, shipyards, or grid. The Celtic Sea is a new area. When Steve and I turned up at a Renewable UK meeting about over a year ago, nobody knew about the Celtic Sea. Everybody thought that the wind story was East Coast, North Sea, Scotland. So please, when everybody is out with their contacts, with stakeholders, talking in the market, it's very, very important that we raise the profile of the Celtic Sea to make sure we get that support.
Thanks, Christoph. It's probably one for myself and Steve to cover off here. If I'm just reading, an anonymous attendee, I may have missed this earlier, apologies if so. Are Blue Gem the preferred bidders for flow in the Celtic Sea, or will the UK Irish government put installations out to tender? It's probably worth mentioning that it is an open and competitive marketplace, offshore wind. Blue Gem, and I'm speaking for them, are working with the Crown Estate to or have secured option on a site, but that is something that any developer can do. So there's no such thing as really a preferred bidder for the Floating Celtic Sea.
It's important to mention that the Crown Estate says you could apply for a site up to 100 megawatts as a test and demonstration site. And you'll notice that Erebus is 96 megawatts. Now, we would clearly like them to increase that size, but also in the end, we do need leasing rounds, which means, as you say, is an open auction round which companies bid into. And to really build out and scale, we've shared our aspirations with the Crown Estate, as I know Steve has as well, that we should move to treating the Celtic Sea like other parts of the UK waters, where you've got a regular supply of new projects for companies like us, and as you say, lots of other people to bid into and to create the pipeline.
I think, as well, just as a company, we would welcome other people coming to the Celtic Sea to develop projects. That's where you get synergy. That's where you get project pipelines. So yeah, it's definitely not a closed shop, and not one that we would want closed, actually.
Steve, do you want to come in on that at all, or are we?
I just to say I completely support what both Christoph and Dave have said. We do want leasing rounds at the moment. It's 100 megawatt is the limit in terms of deployment. We'd like to think that we can. Would like to think that we can work with the Crown Estate to increase that, but in the longer term and not too distant, we want to have a pipeline of projects. And I think if we can get that pipeline of projects, say a gigawatt by the end of 2030 or by 2030, that's a lot of floating offshore wind. That's a lot of platforms. It's a lot of capacity. It's a fantastic opportunity. I can't see how we can hit 40 gigawatts by 2030 without investing in this way. And furthermore, it's a government manifesto commitment. So one way or another, this is going to happen. And I think the key thing for everybody on the call is there's going to be more than enough work to go around. So the answer to the day is not competition, but collaboration. We're in collaboration and we can work in a collegiate way. Then there'll be more than enough work to go around. And furthermore, if we get it right, there'll be more than enough opportunity to take our experiences abroad and export them.
Okay, we're rapidly coming towards the bewitching hour. So just a couple of points just to follow up on the skills agenda from Cornwall College Group. They're actively working to support developments in their curriculum, and there is going to be a Marine Eye skills discovery room within our schedule. So watch this space for that, for those that are interested. Final point from D. Cotter. Hopefully a technology specific category on the way for CFD auctions and floating wind. I think that's a comment rather than a question. I think for those who've not yet seen it, the CFD consultation, which is currently doing the rounds, gives a reasonably good idea of what the government's thinking potentially is. And yes, we are, I think, all cautiously optimistic about what that's going to mean in terms of CFD support for the region.
It is worth pointing out that we would encourage people to respond to that consultation because it's about getting views from organisations. So
and if people want,
it's been extended now to 29th of May, so there's more time to respond.
And the industry is pretty joined up on what the core message is. So if anybody would like some text or some word or discuss, then do contact me or Steve, and we can help you write that response.
Yeah.
I think as a supply chain company in wanting to become involved and stimulate the activity in the projects of the pipeline, this is a quick win for you, is to get in touch with Steve and Christoph and write to your MPs.
So in terms of follow-ups, and I'm conscious that that's part of this this part. We are looking potentially to follow up with a more focused event, probably in the summer, which could form part of a Celtic Sea cluster event. with a view to looking at defining something. We've talked about the opportunities. The time is now right to start defining what those challenges are, so that we know what it is we need to do to bring ourselves up and meet that challenge. We've had a fantastic attendance today, and hopefully we see this as a call to arms. Political will is aligning with investor interest, which is aligning with market opportunity. This is an industry that is going to happen. We've got a choice as a region. We can either have it done to us, or we can make sure that we are at the forefront and playing our part. And so the fact that you've attended today means that you want to play your part, which is great news. Now the easy bit is making sure that we do it. That's easy though. We'll sort that. So that's it from me. I'll let Steve, Simon, and Lisa and Lars wrap up.
Yep, nothing really more from me to say. Just thank everyone for their attendance and the support, and some really great questions there, which perhaps we didn't get around to. We will answer. Lisa, back to you.
Yes, and thanks from me to our guest speakers today for their great presentations. And from a Marine Eye point of view, just to direct people to the Marine Eye website, which people will have had through this meeting invite, but it's marineeye.co.uk. And it expands a bit further there about some of the information points that Lars has touched on at the beginning. And as we've mentioned at the beginning, we are firmly open for business, and we are actively looking for businesses to get in touch with us. And we'll spend some time with you talking about how we can work up and assist with any project development. Okay, Lars, have you anything to add?
Not a lot to add anymore, I think so, except to thank everyone, I think, who attended. I think so the future opportunities are large, and everyone, I think, so can take a part on this. So, and I said, by Lisa, Marine Eye is open for business, and I think so we heard quite a bit about diversity there. So as said, upcoming discovery room there on skill set is to come. So keep an eye on this. So thank you very much for everyone attending this event.